Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and determination burning in her chest. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 125 pounds, she looked more like a college student than someone about to enter one of the military's most demanding training programs. The other recruits towered over her, their muscular frames casting shadows as they lined up for initial processing. The whispers started immediately. "Is she lost?" one recruit muttered. "Maybe she's here to visit someone," another suggested with a smirk. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. She had heard it all before during her journey to this moment, and she would hear it again. But she was here for a reason that went deeper than anyone could imagine. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, Sarah had learned early that size meant nothing when survival was on the line. Her father, a former Marine himself, had abandoned the family when she was 8. Her mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Sarah became the protector of her 2 younger siblings, walking them to school through gang territory and standing guard while they played in the cramped apartment courtyard. The local gang members had tried to recruit her brother Miguel when he turned 14. Sarah confronted them in the alley behind their building, her small frame trembling with fury rather than fear. "He's not joining anything," she told the leader, a man twice her size with tattoos covering his neck. When he laughed and reached for her shoulder, Sarah's training kicked in. Her father might have left, but not before teaching her some basic self-defense moves. She ducked under his arm, struck his solar plexus, and when he doubled over, she brought her knee up to his face. The man stumbled backward, blood streaming from his nose, while his crew stared in shock. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about the tiny girl who had dropped Carlos Tank Rodriguez. But instead of bringing trouble, it brought respect. The gangs left her family alone, and Sarah realized she had found her calling. She began training seriously, spending every free moment at the local community center's makeshift gym. The elderly boxing coach, Roberto Vasquez, saw something special in her speed and precision. He had been a Golden Gloves champion in his youth and recognized raw talent when he saw it. Under Roberto's guidance, Sarah learned that technique could overcome brute strength. She studied every martial art she could access through library books and borrowed videos. Jiu-jitsu, Krav Maga, Muay Thai, boxing. She absorbed it all like a sponge. Her body might have been small, but her mind was sharp, and she understood leverage, momentum, and the human body's vulnerable points better than fighters twice her age. When Sarah announced her intention to join the Marines, her high school counselor laughed. "Maybe the Air Force would be a better fit," she suggested. "Or the Navy. They have administrative positions." Even Roberto, who had seen her skills firsthand, worried about the physical demands of Marine training. But Sarah's mind was made up. She wanted to prove that strength came in many forms. And she wanted to honor her father's legacy while creating her own path. The recruitment process was grueling. The physical fitness tests were designed for average-sized men, and Sarah had to work twice as hard to meet the minimum requirements. Pull-ups were her biggest challenge. Her lightweight frame actually worked against her as she struggled to build the necessary upper body strength. She trained for 8 months, often until her hands bled from the bar, gradually increasing her count from 0 to the required 3, then pushing beyond to 8. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Williams, was initially skeptical. He had seen plenty of determined young women wash out during the intense training phases, but something about Sarah's quiet confidence and the calluses on her hands told him she was different. During her final fitness test, she not only met every requirement, but exceeded several benchmarks, finishing the 3-mile run in a time that would have been respectable for male recruits. Now, standing in the California sun with her fellow recruits, Sarah felt the weight of every doubt that had been cast her way. The drill instructors were already sizing up the group, their experienced eyes cataloging strengths and weaknesses. Drill instructor Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, stopped in front of Sarah. "What's your name, recruit?" His voice boomed across the formation. "Sarah Martinez, sir," she replied, her voice clear and strong despite the butterflies in her stomach. Peterson walked around her slowly, like a predator circling prey. "You sure you're in the right place, Martinez? The cheerleading tryouts are probably at the high school down the road." Laughter rippled through the ranks of male recruits. Sarah's face burned, but she kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. "I'm exactly where I need to be, sir." "We'll see about that," Peterson muttered, making a note on his clipboard. "We'll see about that." The first week of training was designed to break down civilian mentalities and build military discipline. Sarah excelled at the mental challenges, memorizing codes, following complex instructions, and maintaining military bearing under pressure. But the physical demands were relentless. The obstacle courses were built for longer legs and stronger arms. The combat training scenarios favored recruits who could overpower opponents through sheer force. During hand-to-hand combat instruction, Sarah was repeatedly paired with larger opponents. The instructor, Sergeant Rodriguez, seemed to take particular pleasure in watching her struggle against recruits who outweighed her by 50 to 80 pounds. "In real combat, Martinez, the enemy won't care about your feelings," he would say, as she picked herself up from the mat for the dozenth time. "Size matters." But Sarah began to notice patterns in her opponent's movements. The bigger recruits relied heavily on their strength and size advantages, telegraphing their moves and leaving themselves open to counters. During one particularly brutal training session, she was matched against Private Thompson, a former college football player who stood 6 feet 3 inches and weighed nearly 240 pounds. Thompson grabbed her in a bear hug, lifting her off the ground with ease. Instead of struggling against his grip, Sarah relaxed her body, making herself dead weight. When he adjusted his hold to compensate, she drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus, then hooked her leg behind his knee as she twisted. Thompson crashed to the mat, Sarah landing on top in a controlling position. The training area fell silent. Sergeant Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up, but he quickly recovered his composure. "Lucky shot, Martinez. Reset and go again." The second round lasted even less time. Thompson, angry and embarrassed, came at Sarah with wild swings. She ducked under his first punch, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to throw him over her hip. He hit the mat hard. The wind knocked out of him. "Beginner's luck," Rodriguez muttered, but Sarah caught the flicker of interest in his eyes. Word began to spread among the drill instructors about the small recruit who had unexpected fighting skills. But instead of earning respect, it seemed to paint an even bigger target on her back. The instructors pushed her harder, assigned her extra duties, and found every excuse to criticize her performance. They began calling her Fragile, a nickname that stung more than any physical blow. The name stuck among her fellow recruits as well. Some used it mockingly, others with genuine concern for her well-being in such a demanding environment. Sarah endured it all in silence, channeling her frustration into her training. She studied her opponents, learned their weaknesses, and continued to improve her technique. Late at night in the barracks, while other recruits slept, Sarah practiced her forms and visualized combat scenarios. She knew that proving herself once or twice wouldn't be enough. She would need to demonstrate her abilities beyond any shadow of doubt, and she sensed that opportunity was coming soon. The atmosphere in the training unit was tense. Sarah could feel the instructors watching her, waiting for her to break or wash out like they expected. Her fellow recruits were divided between those who respected her skills and those who saw her as a liability to the unit's reputation. But Sarah had faced worse odds in the streets of East LA, and she wasn't backing down now. She thought of her brother Miguel, now safely in college thanks to her determination to keep him away from gang life. She thought of her mother, working herself to exhaustion to support the family. She thought of her absent father and the legacy he had abandoned. Most of all, she thought of every person who had told her she was too small, too weak, too fragile to make it in a man's world. The training was about to enter its most challenging phase. Advanced combat techniques and unit integration exercises. Sarah knew this would be her chance to silence the doubts once and for all. The nickname Fragile was about to be proven very, very wrong. The advanced combat training phase began on a scorching Tuesday morning with an announcement that made Sarah's stomach tighten with anticipation. Drill instructor Peterson stood before the assembled recruits, his voice carrying across the training ground like thunder. "Today we begin realistic combat scenarios," he announced, his eyes scanning the formation. "You'll be tested on everything you've learned so far: hand-to-hand combat, tactical thinking, and unit cohesion under pressure. The weak links in this chain will be exposed, and they will be eliminated from the program." Sarah felt dozens of eyes turn toward her as Peterson continued. She had become the unofficial representative of everyone's doubts about physical standards in the Marines. Some recruits genuinely wanted her to succeed, but others saw her potential failure as validation of their own prejudices about women in combat roles. The first exercise was individual combat assessment. Each recruit would face multiple opponents in succession, with scenarios designed to simulate real battlefield conditions. The instructors emphasized that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about demonstrating tactical awareness, proper technique, and the warrior mindset that defined Marines. Sarah watched as recruit after recruit entered the combat zone. Some performed admirably, using their training to overcome challenging scenarios. Others struggled, falling victim to panic or poor technique. Thompson, her previous opponent, dominated through pure aggression and size, overpowering his challengers with brute force tactics that drew approving nods from some instructors. When Sergeant Rodriguez called her name, the conversation around the training area died to whispers. Sarah stepped forward, her heart hammering but her breathing controlled. Years of training had taught her to channel nervous energy into focused awareness. "Martinez," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "Your scenario is urban combat. Multiple hostiles, unknown numbers. Your mission is to neutralize threats and secure the area. Are you ready?" "Ready, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She entered the mock urban environment, a maze of plywood walls and containers designed to simulate a war-torn city. The first opponent appeared from behind a corner, larger than her and moving with aggressive intent. Instead of meeting his charge head-on, Sarah used the environment to her advantage. She ducked behind a wall, forcing him to commit to pursuing her into a narrow alleyway where his size advantage was negated. When he rounded the corner, Sarah was waiting. She had positioned herself low, and as he bent to look for her, she exploded upward with an uppercut to his solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping for air, she swept his legs and controlled his descent to the ground. One down. The second opponent appeared immediately, having heard the commotion. This one was smarter, approaching cautiously with his hands up in a proper fighting stance. Sarah recognized him as Davis, one of the more skilled recruits who had boxed in college. This wouldn't be as easy. Davis threw a combination of punches that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Sarah had spent years training against Roberto, whose hand speed was legendary even in his 70s. She slipped the punches with minimal movement, each dodge requiring just inches of space as she stayed close enough to counter. When Davis committed to a power shot, Sarah grabbed his extended arm and used his forward momentum to throw him over her shoulder, but Davis was quick to recover, rolling with the throw and attempting to grab her leg. Sarah anticipated this, pivoting away and delivering a precise kick to his ribs that left him curled on the ground. 2 down. The third scenario came without warning. As Sarah moved through what appeared to be a clear corridor, a recruit dropped from above. Peterson had positioned someone on top of the containers to simulate a surprise attack. The attacker, Williams, was one of the biggest recruits in the unit, nearly 6 feet 5 inches of solid muscle. Williams landed heavily, trying to drive Sarah to the ground with his body weight. But Sarah had been expecting some kind of surprise. The scenario had been too easy so far. As Williams descended, she stepped aside at the last moment and guided his fall with a hand on his back, sending him face first into the ground while she maintained her balance. Williams rolled quickly and came up swinging. His reach advantage was significant, but Sarah had faced this challenge before. She moved inside his striking range where his long arms were less effective, working body shots while staying too close for him to generate power in his punches. When Williams tried to clinch and use his weight advantage, Sarah demonstrated why size isn't everything in grappling. She trapped his arm, stepped behind him, and used leverage to take him down with a beautiful hip toss that sent him crashing to the mat. Before he could recover, she had achieved a controlling position that would have been fight-ending in a real combat situation. 3 down. The training area had gone completely silent, except for Sarah's controlled breathing and the groans of defeated recruits. Even the instructors stood transfixed by what they had just witnessed. Rodriguez looked at his stopwatch and shook his head in disbelief. The entire scenario had taken less than 3 minutes. "Time!" Peterson called out, his voice lacking its usual authority. Sarah stood in the center of the combat zone, barely breathing hard, while 3 larger opponents slowly picked themselves up from the ground around her. As Sarah exited the training area, she could hear the whispers starting among her fellow recruits. But now the tone was different, respectful rather than dismissive. The nickname Fragile suddenly seemed not just inaccurate, but almost insulting to what they had just witnessed. Sergeant Rodriguez approached her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Sarah thought she might be in trouble for making the exercise look too easy. But instead, he nodded slowly and said, "That was textbook technique. Martinez, proper use of leverage, environmental awareness, and tactical thinking. Outstanding work." The praise from Rodriguez, known for his sparing use of compliments, sent ripples through the gathered recruits. Sarah felt a flush of satisfaction but kept her expression neutral. She knew this was just one test, and the real challenges were still ahead. Over the following days, the training intensity increased dramatically. The instructors seemed determined to find Sarah's breaking point, assigning her to the most difficult scenarios and pairing her with the strongest opponents. But each challenge only seemed to reveal new aspects of her skill set. During weapons training, her small hands actually provided an advantage with certain firearms, allowing for better control and accuracy. In tactical exercises, her ability to move quietly and fit into small spaces made her invaluable for reconnaissance missions. Her fellow recruits began seeking her advice on technique, recognizing that her success came from superior knowledge rather than physical gifts they couldn't match. But the real test came during a unit cohesion exercise designed to push the recruits to their absolute limits. The scenario was a prisoner rescue mission requiring the unit to work together under extreme pressure while facing multiple armed opponents. The twist that no one saw coming was that 5 of the Marine instructors would be playing the role of enemy combatants. These weren't fellow recruits. These were experienced Marines with years of combat training and real battlefield experience. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible for the recruit unit to complete successfully. As the unit prepared for the mission, Sarah found herself naturally falling into a leadership role despite her junior status. Her tactical insights during planning sessions had earned the respect of even the most skeptical recruits. When they asked for her input on approach strategies, she studied the mock battlefield carefully. "They're expecting us to use standard assault tactics," she told the group. But we're outnumbered and outgunned by experienced fighters. We need to be smarter, not stronger. Her plan was unconventional but brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of a direct assault, she proposed using the environment and their numbers advantage to create multiple simultaneous distractions, while a small team executed the actual rescue. It was the kind of asymmetric thinking that had served her well in every challenge she had faced. Thompson, who had become one of her strongest supporters after their early training encounters, volunteered to lead the main diversion team. "If Martinez says it'll work, I'm in," he declared, and others nodded in agreement. The exercise began at dawn. Sarah's team moved into position while the diversion teams created chaos at multiple points around the compound. The instructors responded exactly as Sarah had predicted, splitting their forces to address the multiple threats. What happened next would become the stuff of legend at Camp Pendleton. As the diversion teams engaged the instructors in sustained firefights with training ammunition, Sarah led her rescue team through a route she had identified during reconnaissance. But when they reached the building where the prisoners were held, they found it was a trap. All 5 Marine instructors were waiting for them in the central room, having anticipated the rescue attempt. These weren't training dummies or fellow recruits. These were Staff Sergeant Martinez, no relation, Sergeant First Class Johnson, Corporal Blake, Lance Corporal Morrison, and Gunnery Sergeant Peterson himself. Combined, they had over 40 years of combat experience and had been briefing specifically on how to counter Sarah's tactical approach. The instructors had expected the rescue team to retreat when faced with such overwhelming opposition. Instead, Sarah made a split-second decision that would define her Marine career. "Take the prisoners and go!" she shouted to her teammates. "I'll hold them off." What followed was the most extraordinary display of martial arts skill anyone at the base had ever witnessed. Sarah didn't try to fight all 5 instructors at once. That would have been suicide even for someone with her abilities. Instead, she used the room's layout to force them to engage her 1 or 2 at a time while constantly moving to prevent them from coordinating their attacks. The first instructor to reach her was Lance Corporal Morrison, a former college wrestler who outweighed her by 90 pounds. Sarah met his takedown attempt with perfect timing, redirecting his momentum and sending him crashing into a wall with enough force to take him out of the fight. Sergeant Johnson and Corporal Blake attacked together, trying to overwhelm her with coordinated strikes. But Sarah had trained for exactly this scenario, flowing between their attacks like water while landing precise counters that gradually wore them down. When Johnson overcommitted to a power punch, Sarah caught his arm and used leverage to throw him into Blake, sending both men to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Staff Sergeant Martinez approached more cautiously, his years of experience telling him that this small recruit was far more dangerous than her appearance suggested. He used proper technique and kept his guard up, making it the longest exchange of the fight. But Sarah's speed and precision eventually found openings in his defense, and a perfectly timed combination left him stunned and off balance. The final confrontation was with Peterson himself, the massive drill instructor who had doubted her from day one. Peterson was not just large, but skilled, with combat experience in 2 overseas deployments. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been beaten by a recruit. The fight between them lasted nearly a minute, an eternity in hand-to-hand combat. Peterson used every advantage his size and experience provided, but Sarah countered with technique that bordered on artistry. When he finally made a small mistake in his footwork, Sarah was there to capitalize. She caught him off balance and used his own momentum to take him down with a throw that sent his massive frame crashing to the floor. 5 instructors down. Time elapsed. Less than 4 minutes. The rescue team had successfully completed their mission during the chaos, but everyone in the compound had stopped to watch the extraordinary display in the central room. When the smoke cleared, Sarah stood alone in the center, while 5 experienced Marines slowly picked themselves up from the ground around her. Peterson got to his feet last, rubbing his shoulder where he had hit the ground. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, then slowly began to clap. One by one, the other instructors joined in, then the rescue team, then every Marine and recruit who had witnessed the encounter. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Peterson said, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there before. "Remind me never to call you Fragile again." The nickname died that day, replaced by something much better: the genuine respect of her peers and instructors. Sarah Martinez had proven that strength came in many forms, and that technique, intelligence, and determination could overcome any physical disadvantage. But more importantly, she had shown that the warrior spirit that defined the Marines wasn't limited by size, gender, or anyone's preconceptions. She had earned her place among the few, the proud, and she had done it on her own terms. The news of Sarah's extraordinary performance spread through Camp Pendleton like wildfire. Within hours, Marines from other units were finding excuses to walk past the training areas where Sarah's class conducted their exercises, hoping to catch a glimpse of the recruit who had single-handedly taken down 5 experienced instructors. The story grew with each telling, but the core facts remained undeniable. A 125-pound woman had defeated opponents who collectively outweighed her by over 500 pounds. Colonel Rebecca Morrison, the base commander, called for a full report on the exercise. She had served for 25 years and had never heard of anything quite like what had occurred in the prisoner rescue scenario. When she reviewed the training footage, she watched Sarah's performance 3 times before setting down the tablet and shaking her head in amazement. "Get me a meeting with this recruit," she told her aide. "I want to understand how someone with her physical parameters achieved these results." The meeting took place in Colonel Morrison's office 2 days later. Sarah reported as ordered, her dress uniform immaculate and her bearing perfect. She had no idea why the base commander wanted to see her, but she suspected it had something to do with the rescue exercise that everyone was still talking about. Colonel Morrison gestured for Sarah to sit, then studied her for a moment before speaking. "Martinez, I've been in the Corps for a quarter-century. I've seen exceptional Marines, and I've seen extraordinary performances under pressure. What you did in that training exercise was something else entirely. Tell me about your background." For the next hour, Sarah found herself sharing her story with the base commander. She talked about growing up in East LA, about protecting her family from gang violence, about her training with Roberto, and about the determination that had driven her to prove herself worthy of wearing the Marine uniform. Colonel Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "Your instructors tell me you've been called Fragile," Morrison finally said. "How do you feel about that?" Sarah straightened in her chair. "Ma'am, I understand why they use that name. I don't look like what people expect a Marine to look like. But I've learned that appearances can be deceiving. I'd rather be underestimated than feared until the moment when it matters most." Morrison smiled for the first time during the interview. "That's exactly the kind of tactical thinking the Corps needs more of. Martinez, I'm recommending you for advanced combat training after graduation. There's a specialized unit that could benefit from your particular skill set." The specialized unit turned out to be the Marine Corps' Close Quarters Battle School, an elite program that trained Marines for urban warfare and high-risk operations. Only the top performers from each training cycle were selected, and Sarah would be the first woman ever assigned to the program directly from basic training. The announcement created a stir throughout the training command. Some saw it as well-deserved recognition for exceptional performance. Others questioned whether the Corps was lowering standards or making exceptions based on political considerations. Sarah heard the whispers but chose to ignore them. She had learned long ago that her performance would speak louder than any words. The weeks leading up to graduation became a victory lap of sorts. Sarah's fellow recruits, who had once doubted her abilities, now looked to her as an example of what determination and skill could accomplish. The instructors who had pushed her hardest became her strongest advocates, recognizing that their challenging training had helped forge something special. Sergeant Rodriguez approached her during one of the final training exercises. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said. "When you first arrived, I thought you were a liability. I pushed you harder than the others because I wanted you to quit before you got yourself or someone else hurt in a real combat situation." Sarah nodded, understanding his perspective. "You were doing your job, Sergeant. The extra challenges made me better." "No," Rodriguez insisted. "I was letting my assumptions cloud my judgment. You never complained, never asked for special treatment, never gave up. You just got better every day until you became the finest hand-to-hand combatant I've ever seen." "I learned something from watching you train." The graduation ceremony was held on a perfect California morning with families gathered to watch their loved ones become Marines. Sarah's mother had flown in from Los Angeles, bringing Miguel and their youngest sister, Maria. It was the first time her family had ever seen her in uniform, and Sarah felt a surge of pride as she stood in formation. When Colonel Morrison called Sarah's name to receive a special recognition award for exceptional performance during training, the applause was thunderous. As she walked across the stage, Sarah caught sight of Peterson in the audience. The massive drill instructor was clapping harder than anyone, a broad smile on his face. After the ceremony, Sarah's family gathered around her for photos and congratulations. Her mother, tears streaming down her face, pulled her aside for a private moment. "Your father would be proud," she said simply. "He made many mistakes, but he always said the Marines would make a good person great. You were already great, mija. Now you're something even more special." Miguel, now 19 and thriving in college, thanks to Sarah's protection during his teenage years, hugged his sister tightly. "You saved my life by keeping me out of the gangs," he whispered. "Now you're going to save other people's lives. I'm so proud of you." The transition to the close quarters battle school brought new challenges and new doubts to overcome. The other students were all experienced Marines with deployment experience and advanced combat training. Sarah was not only the newest Marine, but also the smallest and the only woman in the program. The instructor cadre at CQB school had been briefed on Sarah's background and performance at Camp Pendleton, but they maintained their skepticism. Real combat was different from training exercises, they argued, and there was no substitute for experience under fire. Master Sergeant David Chen, the program director, was a legend in special operations circles. He had served with Marine Recon, Force Recon, and had been seconded to other elite units during his career. He had trained thousands of Marines in close-quarters combat, and he had never seen a recruit straight from basic training assigned to his program. "Martinez," he said during her first day, "I don't care what you did in basic training. This is graduate-level work for experienced warriors. If you can't keep up, you'll be reassigned faster than you can say fragile." The use of her old nickname stung, but Sarah recognized the challenge for what it was. Chen was testing her mental resilience as much as her physical capabilities. She simply nodded and replied, "I understand, Master Sergeant. I'm ready to work." The first month of CQB school was designed to break down everything the students thought they knew about combat and rebuild their skills from the ground up. The training was conducted in realistic environments that simulated everything from urban warfare to shipboarding to embassy rescue missions. Every exercise was designed to push the students beyond their comfort zones. Sarah found herself struggling with some aspects of the training. Her lack of combat experience showed when scenarios required split-second decisions based on battlefield intuition rather than technique. Some of the equipment was designed for larger Marines, forcing her to adapt her approach to work with weapons and gear that weren't optimized for her size. But her fundamental skills remained extraordinary. In close-quarters combat scenarios, her speed and precision continued to amaze instructors and fellow students alike. More importantly, she demonstrated an ability to learn and adapt that impressed even the most skeptical observers. During a particularly challenging urban warfare exercise, Sarah found herself paired with Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, a veteran of 3 deployments who had initially questioned her assignment to the program. The scenario required them to clear a building held by multiple hostile forces while protecting civilian hostages. Williams had planned to take the lead, protecting Sarah while she provided backup support. But when they encountered fierce resistance in the building's main corridor, Sarah's tactical assessment proved superior to his battlefield experience. "The hostiles are funneling us into a kill zone," she observed during a brief break in the fighting. "But there's a service corridor that runs parallel to the main hallway. If we can access it, we can flank their position." Williams looked where she was pointing and realized she was right. His experience had made him cautious about deviating from standard assault tactics, but Sarah's fresh perspective had identified an opportunity he had missed. The flanking maneuver worked perfectly. While the hostile forces concentrated on the main corridor, expecting another frontal assault, Sarah and Williams emerged behind them from the service corridor. The surprise was complete, and they neutralized the threats while successfully protecting the hostages. After the exercise, Williams approached Sarah with a new level of respect in his voice. "That was outstanding tactical thinking, Martinez. You saw options that my experience blinded me to. I was wrong about you." Similar scenes played out throughout Sarah's time at CQB school. Her combination of physical skills and tactical intelligence made her an invaluable team member in any scenario. She learned to leverage her unique capabilities while covering for her relative lack of experience through careful preparation and study. Master Sergeant Chen watched Sarah's progress with growing amazement. In 30 years of training elite Marines, he had never seen anyone improve as quickly or adapt as thoroughly to the demands of advanced combat training. Her performance evaluations were consistently at the top of her class, and her fellow students had voted her as their informal leader for complex operations. During the final graduation exercise, a comprehensive test of everything they had learned, Sarah found herself leading a team of 8 experienced Marines in a hostage rescue mission that would determine their final grades in the program. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. Multiple buildings, dozens of hostile forces, time pressure, and civilian casualties to be avoided at all costs. Sarah's plan was characteristically unconventional. Instead of the standard approach of overwhelming force, she divided her team into 3 elements that would create coordinated distractions while a small rescue team extracted the hostages. It was similar to the strategy that had worked so well during basic training, but adapted for a much more complex environment. The operation unfolded flawlessly. Sarah's team performed with the precision of a special operations unit, each element executing their part of the plan while adapting to changing conditions on the ground. When unexpected resistance appeared, Sarah personally led the assault that cleared the final obstacle between her team and the hostages. The exercise concluded with all hostages safely rescued, all hostile forces neutralized, and 0 civilian casualties, a perfect score that had been achieved only twice in the program's history. During the graduation ceremony, Master Sergeant Chen called Sarah forward to receive the award for outstanding performance. As he pinned the decoration to her uniform, he spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Martinez, in 3 decades of doing this job, I've trained thousands of Marines. You're in the top 5 I've ever seen, and you're the only one who achieved that level straight out of basic training. Don't let anyone ever tell you that size or gender matters more than skill and determination." After graduation from CQB school, Sarah received orders to Camp Lejeune, where she would join an elite Marine expeditionary unit preparing for deployment. Her reputation had preceded her, and for the first time in her military career, she arrived at a new assignment where her capabilities were already known and respected. The nickname Fragile had been permanently retired, replaced by a new call sign that her fellow Marines used with respect and affection, Hurricane. It perfectly captured the devastating force that could emerge from her deceptively calm exterior. Colonel Morrison, who had recognized Sarah's potential early in her career, received regular updates on her progress. The base commander took particular pride in having identified and nurtured exceptional talent. But she wasn't surprised by Sarah's success. She had seen the determination and skill that made it inevitable from their very first meeting. Sarah's story became part of Marine Corps lore, told in recruit training classes as an example of how dedication and proper technique could overcome any physical disadvantage. But for Sarah herself, it was just the beginning. She had proven herself worthy of wearing the eagle, globe, and anchor, and now she was ready to serve her country with the same determination that had carried her from the streets of East LA to the elite ranks of the Corps. Years later, when young recruits asked her about overcoming doubts and proving herself to skeptics, Sarah's answer was always the same. Don't try to prove them wrong. Just focus on being so good at what you do that their opinions become irrelevant. Excellence speaks louder than any argument. The girl who had been labeled fragile had become one of the most respected Marines of her generation, not despite her size, but because of the heart, mind, and warrior spirit that size could never measure. She had turned every disadvantage into an advantage and every doubt into motivation, creating a legacy that would inspire Marines for generations to come. In the end, Sarah Martinez had done more than drop 5 Marines in seconds during a training exercise. She had shattered assumptions about what strength looked like and redefined what it meant to be a warrior. The Corps was stronger because she had refused to let anyone else's limitations become her own.